I'm Lauren West, and in this presentation we're going to be looking at Camille Claudel and Genesis Belanger, their work, their life, and their impact on others. So, starting with Camille Claudel, she was born in 1864 and she lived through 1943. Living most of her life in France, her family moved around quite a bit before they landed in Paris. She sculpted from a young age, experimenting with clay before she later went to an art school, where she met Auguste Rodin. She had a mental break after ending the affair later in life and was put into a mental institution where she stopped sculpting and died alone at 79. Camille's father worked with mortgages and bank loans and was the biggest supporter of Camille's works throughout her life. Her mother came from wealthy Catholic farmers, and her brother Paul, who is 4 years younger, grew up to be a poet. She is the eldest of 3 children. Her family moved to Nogent-sur-Seine when she was 12, where she started working with clay and gained the interest of another sculptor, Alfred Boucher, who encouraged her dad to send her to the Académie Colarossi, who was open to women. She studied with Boucher and later Rodin there. Camille was not always happy in her work. At one point she said, "I would prefer to have a more appealing job. If I could still change careers, I would prefer it. This unfortunate art is made for long beards and ugly faces rather than for a relatively well-endowed woman." She attended the Académie Colarossi, which was one of the very few options that were open to women. It was pretty progressive in that it was not only open to women, but allowed them to draw from male nudes. This experience boosted her confidence and encouraged her to rent a studio space with 3 other sculptors. In France, Camille first studied under Alfred Boucher, but he received a Grand Prix du Salon and left for Italy. Before leaving, though, he asked Rodin to tutor her and a few other girls. She and Rodin then began an affair that lasted for 10 years and influenced both of their artworks dramatically. She was his best assistant, but also his muse. When Rodin wouldn't leave his wife and marry her, Camille was enraged and broke off the 10-year affair. Rodin tried to help her by encouraging her art and offering to pay her rent, but she wanted no assistance from him, and her family would not offer any. In this time, she began combining marble and bronze, which was unprecedented, and experimented with different materials, as pictured on the right. In these experiments, her art took on a different maturity, which was still emotional but more practical and very connected to her day-to-day life. But her emotional health began deteriorating into paranoia as her bouts of anger grew worse. She would even destroy her work sometimes when unhappy with them. Camille's paranoia grew to the point where she would have traps set up in her studio and only speak to others through shutters. Her father remained her biggest supporter throughout her life. Besides him, she felt like the world was against her. But her father later died, and she was not told. Her family took the opportunity to send her to a mental hospital. Doctors tried to convince her family that she was not insane, but her family wanted her to stay there in isolation. After admittance, she lost all interest in sculpting, and she was only visited a few times in the 30 years that she was there. At one point, Camille said, "I am scared. I don't know what is going to happen to me. What was the point of working so hard and of being talented to be rewarded like this? Never a penny, tormented all my life. It is horrible. One cannot imagine it." Comparing her work with Rodin's work long overshadowed hers, and art historians always grouped them together since they had such a big impact on each other. Her work was fairly recently re-established as a progressive view of emotion and human nature. Coming towards the end of her life, the last 30 years were spent in isolation, and she died alone at 78. Her body was put into a mass grave after her family wouldn't come to claim it. However, her impact was large, as her experimentation with intimate scenes and combining marble with other materials was new and unprecedented, and shows the struggles of a woman of equal to superior talent of her peers to make a name for herself in her lifetime. The Musée Rodin showcases many of her works now, and a movie was made of her in 1988 and a musical in 2003. Now we're moving on to the more modern artist, Genesis Belanger, who was born in 1978 and lives into present. Genesis went to the School of the Arts Institute in Chicago and Hunter College in New York. She started sculpting in school and began exhibiting as early as 2012. Many of her subjects focus on subverting expectations, as she warps humanistic shapes with food and often raises the scale of the piece for more dramatic effect. Her subjects often include food, cigarettes, and hands, which reference the act of eating and tasting. She references one of her pieces, Big Yummy, on her Instagram, commenting, "Maybe today is one of those days where you want to chew someone up and spit them out." As far as education, she completed her Bachelor of Fine Arts coursework at the Rhode Island School of Design and later got her Bachelor of Fine Arts degree at School of the Arts Institute of Chicago in 2004. She later completed her Master of Fine Arts in Combined Media at Hunter College, New York in 2012. She's had numerous exhibitions beginning in 2016 throughout the country, which are listed on her website. Many of the themes present are in finding happiness in the danger of something, like in smoking. Many of the relationships present in her works are between people and food or cigarettes, perhaps referencing Freud's oral fixation stage of development. Her pieces are surrealist in nature and call to mind Murray's fur teacup or Dully's lobster phone. She appears to be largely influenced by Robert Gaubert, who also uses household items, but in a way that makes them humorous and over-sexualized. Many of her pieces reference the AIDS crisis and the sobriety of humanity, as well as the humor found in it. Many of her pieces have common materials like porcelain, concrete, stoneware, sometimes ceramic, wood, and steel. Overall, her work is meant to be seen as somewhat dreamlike, as her pieces spark interest and discomfort, which is contrasted by the low-intensity pastel colors and soft, rounded shapes. She tends to take things that are comfortable, like household items, and places that discomfort on them to make people think about what's really making them uncomfortable within those familiar shapes. Another reference to Sunday morning on her Instagram is, "Sometimes this is how it feels to wake up on a Sunday." Many of her pieces interact with space in a simple but elegant way, like with the shadows that play a role in the way things are propped or draped in front of a wall. Placing household-appearing items in a stark white room set up like a house causes viewers to see it in that light. With her present works, she continues to reference food's role in our lives and experiments with space, such as with twisted cherry stems and pretzels. Her last show ended mid-August in LA, California. Overall, her impact is challenging perceptions and pushing the field of minimalism. She references past works like the Pieta and challenges what we view as art, like with Mary caressing Jesus versus hands caressing bananas. Overall, these artists challenge expectations and pose similar questions as to not only what art is, but what it could be, and their legacy, whether established or growing, is important for future generations to see.